And joining me next is Tamar Jacoby of Immigration Works, an advocacy group, to talk about a Republican version of the DREAM Act that is reportedly in the works. Welcome, Tamar.
Hey, Jason. Nice to be here.
So refresh our memories first for people not familiar with this piece of legislation. The current DREAM Act has been knocking around Congress for about a decade, I believe. How would it work?
The DREAM Act is intended to help young people who were brought to the United States by their parents coming illegally. So these are people who were born in Mexico or Central America or somewhere else in the globe, whose parents came without papers or came on a visa and then overstayed. And so the young people, through no fault of their own, are unauthorized, but they're growing up in the United States, they're getting educated here, they don't think of Mexico or wherever else as home. So they're probably going to spend most of the rest of their lives here, but they're unauthorized. So they graduate from high school. It's hard to go to college. It's all but impossible to work. And so the DREAM Act is intended to help young people like that by giving them the original one gave them a path to legalization and then citizenship if they went to college or served in the military.
Okay. Now, it's been reported that Republicans, led by Mark Rubio, the senator from Florida, have a variation on this DREAM Act in the works. And I know we don't know all the details because they haven't been released yet, but a well-sourced journalist like yourself, Tamar, I'm sure knows a little bit about what must be in there. So how would the Republican version reportedly differ from the current version of the DREAM Act?
Well, Senator Rubio has been talking to reporters, so we have a little bit on the record of a couple of interviews of his. The difference between his version and the Democratic version is he doesn't give these young people an automatic or direct path to citizenship. He's going to give them what are called non-immigrant visas. Mm-hmm. And so once you have a non-immigrant visa, that's not the same as a green card. A green card is what leads to citizenship. He'll give you a non-immigrant visa, then you can find another way to get a green card through some other process or waiting in a different line with different qualifications, and then you can get to be a citizen. So these young people under his version could eventually end up as citizens, but it's a more circuitous route. And probably because many of those other lines for green cards are quite long waits, it could be quite long for some of these people, many years to get to be citizens, and or would require some other reforms to fix those lines.
Okay. Now, Marco Rubio is probably going this route, which is giving people legal status without putting them on a path to citizenship, to try and satisfy some folks in his own party who are considered hardliners on this issue and see a path to citizenship as amnesty. But do you have a problem, Tamar? Does your organization have a problem with doing that, with giving people legal status but not necessarily putting them on a path to citizenship?
There's some important distinctions here, right? If the Rubio bill said there was never any hope that you could get on a path to citizenship, I think many Americans would be troubled by it, right? Given our history, the idea of a group of people who are in this country and are sub-citizens or second-class non-citizens permanently, that's got to give concern to any Americans. But the Rubio bill doesn't do that. The Rubio bill just says you're not getting an automatic path to citizenship. He says you got to work around some, a bit of more of a slalom course, and it could be a long slalom course, but that people can eventually get to it. So, look, the point about Washington is that, the perfect is the enemy of the good in Washington. And what I see as important about the Rubio bill is this is a Republican, an influential Republican senator saying we have to help these people. He speaks very eloquently on the issue. He says there's no one in the Latino community who doesn't love someone who isn't caught in the broken immigration system. We need to help these people for their sake and for ours. Okay, maybe we can't, it has to be a bit of a compromise so that we can get some Republicans and some Democrats. Yes, it's less than what the Democrat bill offered several years ago, but it's an answer, and it's better than no answer. So yes, I'm very encouraged to see it happen.
Yeah. Is that what you think, what the real criticism of from the left is of what Rubio is trying to do? I mean, they're talking about they're having a problem with this sub-citizen status, as they call it. But is there real concern that you have a Republican out there, a Republican star nonetheless, that might be getting out ahead on an immigration reform issue?
Exactly. I mean, let's. I'm sure there's some Democrats who are acting out of principle, and let's leave some space for them. But what's the biggest problem here for many Democrats is that this upends the old Democratic scenario that has been their scenario for at least the past 5 years, where they wanted voters to think, Latino voters in particular, that the Democrats were the champions of immigration reform, and the only reason it didn't pass was because some racist Republicans were blocking it. Well, if Rubio's DREAM Act starts to move, that disproves that scenario. We've got some Republicans trying to make change happen, and of course there are many Democrats, or certainly some partisan Democrats, who don't want to see their old political myth be given the lie.
Okay. We got about a minute left, Tamar, and I know you also follow developments at the state level, and there have been some interesting ones recently, particularly in red states in terms of immigration and what states have been doing, deciding perhaps not to go the Arizona route. Can you tell us about what's been going on in, I believe it's Mississippi and Georgia?
It's Mississippi and Alabama. The Southeast is the part of the country that's had the biggest influx of immigrants in the last few decades. Those are the states that have been, after Arizona, the most eager to crack down in the last couple of years. Very tough laws passed last year in Alabama and Georgia. Well, this year, Mississippi considered its own very tough law, and actually it got stopped. It was passed in the House, a milder version, and then members of the Senate, including it's a very red state and a very red Senate and House, the Senate just declined to take up the bill, and so for now it looks like the bill is dead. The governor, who's a big champion, Tea Party supported governor, is going to still try to probably bring it up in special session, but this was a very Republican state with a strong Tea Party, with a lot of new immigrants, saying, wait a minute, we believe in enforcement, but we're not sure we believe in using enforcement tools to try to drive immigrants out of the state. And that's the big distinction. Nobody in Mississippi is saying we're against immigration enforcement. No one's saying we're for illegal immigrants. But they are saying, wait a minute, our economy depends on a lot of immigrant workers. Do we really want to drive them away? Do we want to become known as a xenophobic state, unfriendly to foreigners? And the answer was no. Meanwhile, neighboring Alabama, where they did pass a very tough law last year, what's really intriguing there is that the very people who sponsored that law, the governor and Republican legislators, they're saying, wait a minute, the consequences of this law have not been good for our economy, have not been good for our reputation as a state. We're starting to, those old fears of Jim Crow, are we starting to look like Jim Crow again? And they're going to revisit their law this year and take out some of the worst, harshest aspects.